The next big trend in gaming, extraction shooters are taking over the industry. Or that's what people might have you think. Developers, publishers, games journalists, and fans themselves are viewing extraction shooters as the next big trend, following up the rampant takeover of the battle royale genre in the 2010s. But this genre, the extraction shooter, barely exists yet. Despite gamers often whining, "Oh, another extraction shooter," every time that one is announced, there have been basically none which have actually hit the mainstream. But what defines an extraction shooter itself isn't even straightforward. While battle royale as a genre was a direct response to film and literary media, the extraction shooter evolved naturally through an amalgamation of trends in game design. MMOs and dungeon crawlers from the 1990s to now have had players engaging in live PvE and PvP raids where they would enter an arena, fight, loot, and then share the spoils amongst themselves. Titanfall in 2014 allowed players to extract and survive when they were on the losing side of a battle,
and secure the evac point for extraction.
and 10 years later, Helldivers 2 retains a similar mechanic.
Extraction complete. Pelican 1 beginning ascent.
In many cases, extracting or simply leaving a location in games allows the player to A. successfully complete that mission, level, or area, or B. rewards the player for having survived. An extraction shooter, however, is specifically 1. a shooter, and 2. places successful extraction or survival as the key catalyst for victory. Games have always asked us what happens when you die. Depending on the game, the answer is you lose or you respawn. An extraction shooter seems to ask, what happens when you live? The true origins of the genre are still argued amongst by diehard fans, but 2016's The Division had a mode called Dark Zone that many consider to be the first early example. The mode's advertised gameplay firmly aligns itself within the tenets of extraction shooters today, a PvPvE zone where gear or loot acquired would be kept by the player after they successfully extract, and where, if one dies in the zone, the loot that they brought with them was lootable by other players, i.e. permadeath. There were more complexities, but every extraction shooter which came after has retained Dark Zone's core tenets. What if, unlike in a battle royale, the victory came from simply surviving? What if, rather than starting every round from nothing, the gear that you found along the way persisted from round to round? In retrospect, Dark Zone may have just been a little bit too ahead of its time for the mainstream in 2016. At this time, though, foundational examples of the extraction genre were being crafted. It's interesting to see how incredibly dated the genre's roots are. And while many wouldn't appreciate them for years to come, how these foundational games are still the ones which define the genre to this day. Escape from Tarkov, released into alpha in 2016, and Hunt Showdown, revealing its initial builds the next year, both began development several years before extraction shooter was a term that anyone had even conceptualized. While the two games are as different from each other as they are unique to themselves, essentially every subsequent example of the genre has taken some inspiration in part from the two different approaches that Hunt and Tarkov take to the extraction shooter genre. And yet, since around 2017, nothing has been able to touch these two. Vigor, The Cycle Frontier, Marauders, Star Siege Dead Zone, Ghosts of Tabor with some caveats, and perhaps more which fall into obscurity of time all failed to gather widespread recognition besides initial periods of hype, all for slightly different reasons. The Tarkov and Hunt fanbase have a game that they enjoy. There's little reason that those players would stop grinding their favorite game to start playing this one, especially when a game in this genre inherently requires a relatively long amount of playtime to really shine. That's one of the greatest issues with the extraction shooter genre at its core. Basically, every attempt at making one relies on a loop which abandons immediate satisfaction or fun for that deeper, more rewarding experience of having to overcome a great struggle. That might be incredibly attractive to hardcore gamers, it might even be incredibly entertaining to viewers on YouTube or Twitch. But that's not the space where the next big thing will reside. The new Battle Royale, it very inherently can't be. Speaking of big things, AAA publishers have tried their hand at pushing extraction shooters in the mainstream and both fundamentally missed their marks. Neither Call of Duty DMZ or Battlefield's Hazard Zone differentiated themselves from the other core modes that they were attached to in order to warrant playing them for any reason. While the modes simplified the extraction shooter formula, they seem to miss fundamental tenets of why the games they sought to take inspiration from were actually beloved by their fans. DMZ and Hazard Zone actually proved a fantastic point. It became clear that simply approachable extraction mechanics in a modern military setting does not make a good, enjoyable, or popular extraction shooter. So, what does? Enter map, do something, and then extract for X reward may be the literal foundation of what an extraction shooter is, but it doesn't define why a game within the genre is good, or what a new one should strive for. In my opinion, publishers comparing the genre to Battle Royale instantly sets a new title up for failure, because making a good extraction shooter game is a much more complex feat of design than a simple mode. Now, success stories in the niche, namely Hunt Showdown and Escape from Tarkov, have proven that successful games within the niche should be their own thing first, and an extraction shooter second. But they do share tenets of design which can be analyzed to understand why these games work, and why they're still played after all these years, something that others have failed to replicate. Firstly, the game needs well-executed, addicting, and satisfying surface-level entertainment value. In EFT, for example, looting, walking around, drinking, eating, everything you do or interact with in Tarkov has great animations, sounds, and is satisfying to the ears and eyes. In Hunt, punching or stabbing grunts, throwing knives and axes, opening doors, burning stuff. In both games, simply being in the game is fun on a very subtle level. You don't need to be winning to be enjoying playing the game. Secondly, a strong visual language. The aesthetics really do matter. To follow the last part, a more immersive world means a more addicting game. The more unique and original, the better. When I say that a game in this genre's visual language needs to be unique, I don't mean unique or new to the extraction shooter genre. I mean to the games and entertainment industry as a whole. Tarkov's visual style nails post-Soviet grit and milsim gear and gun porn aesthetics better than anyone in the industry. And Hunt Showdown's early American, deep south, occult, industrial revolution, forgotten technology charm is utterly unique. These aesthetics in and of themselves got large numbers of players through the doors in the first place. Remember, no one originally picked these games up because they were extraction shooters. Games need to either do something better than it has already been done, or do something that no one has seen before. Thirdly, embedding the player within the game world. An extension on immersive visuals and audio, but going beyond that, give players the feeling that they are part of something bigger, witnessing a world that exists despite them rather than for them, while giving them the controls to overcome the challenges presented if they work for it. This is one of the core tenets of extraction shooter design. Events, a global economy, and I hope, in the future, ideas that we maybe haven't seen yet, such as evolving and dynamic story elements which incorporate a player's personal identity into the game-wide narrative. That's going to be huge for this genre. The better that the game can keep the player embedded within its universe, the more engrossing it will feel, and the less likely a player will simply feel frustrated when things inevitably don't go their way. Fourthly, speaking of things not going one's way, a game needs a way to risk nothing and still come out on top. Scav runs in Tarkov, free hunters in Hunt Showdown, every game has its own version, but the game must give players a way to simply play the game, even if they're down to nothing. How this is implemented could mean anything, giving the players things for free on a timer, separate modes with a different risk and reward factor. It all depends on what winning is as defined by the game's loop. And speaking of which, fifthly, a clear vision for the intended gameplay loop at the core of the game's design, but enough complexity to the sandbox to allow for freeform and creative gameplay. Tarkov's biggest issue is that it is possibly too freeform. It's not really clear how the devs want the players to play the game. Some mechanics push in one direction, while others push in the other. Hunt Showdown's symmetrical health and damage balancing does create a beautiful sandbox of freeform PvP. Or it would, if certain balancing decisions in tandem with a fundamentally broken skill-based matchmaking system didn't mean that high-level play is dominated by a meta playstyle. I won't lie, this aspect of game design is possibly the hardest to get right in the genre, and no one has figured it out yet. And lastly, but very much not leastly, if you're a PvP game, a strong anti-cheat. Yeah, this one unfortunately has to be mentioned. It's the second biggest reason behind fear of a steep learning curve that the extraction shooter genre isn't more popular. Cheaters are an unfortunate constant reality in all competitive shooter games, but in a game where surviving with your life is the game, they feel like a bigger deal. Again, some have done this better than others, but we've yet to see someone build a game from the ground up with this aspect in mind. The tenets of well-executed extraction shooter design are, in my opinion, far more about crafting an engrossing and captivating experience, period, than they are about capturing the genre that will become the next big trend. Devs, publishers, and fans of games within the genre have been trying to make the extraction shooter the next battle royale craze for close to 4 or 5 years now. And it isn't. No game within the genre has seen even a fifth of the success of any battle royale, even the slightly less popular ones. In my opinion, that's because the requirements for massive mainstream popularity in the shooter space require a small number of very simple yet very difficult to capture conditions. 1. Playable on console. 2. Completely friendly to casual players. One must be able to jump in and jump out of a game at will. 3. Highly replayable and in turn, highly monetizable. And 4. Stable enough and optimized enough to garner an esports scene. Easier said than done, and not necessarily compatible with the design of every game which has or will come to the genre in the future. Some believe that the extraction shooter is completely overhyped, and that one will never see mass popularity. I don't believe that this is true either, but aiming for mass popularity is a mistake. As with so many things, I believe that many who are trying to capture lightning in a bottle, trying to capitalize on trend and zeitgeist, are missing the raw fact that popularity will come naturally when a product is good. People are desperately looking for something new and exciting in the extraction shooter genre, hell, in the shooter genre in general. They will turn to something fresh and captivating the way that they turned to Tarkov and Hunt out of boredom with survival shooters and battle royales in 2018 to 2019. Whether or not games in this subgenre will be able to hit these marks going into the future isn't something that anyone can predict. Beautiful Light, which takes the Hunt Showdown-esque experience into the modern day, hits many of my marks: a strong visual language, a clear gameplay loop designed from the ground up, and unique elements which embed the player within the game world are present as well, such as computer hacking and a three-pronged player versus player sandbox. The stronger that this game can lean into its unique scope and aesthetics, the firmer it can distance itself from the games with which it shares traits, the better. Why someone would play matches of this game over and over, what experiences that they'll get from it, I've yet to see. To be honest, I've been waiting for it to be in a more complete state before I dive in, so as not to spoil its experience with an incomplete one. Arena Breakout Infinite is an odd case. In my opinion, it's the closest that any developer has gotten to delivering a direct copy of Escape from Tarkov's core gameplay design with all of the excess flair removed, whittling the game down to a simple core: enter, loot, fight, extract, repeat gameplay loop. A live service, non-wiping version of Tarkov's gameplay with events and different game modes as money sinks, all revolving around a PvP-centric player economy. It's all certainly an interesting direction. We'll see if the mainstream crowd finds it accessible and entertaining, and if the monetization model is accepted by genre fans. Whether or not the devs stole EFT's assets or work without permission has yet to be proven legally. But to be brutally honest, the mainstream audience that the game aims to capture will not care. If they find the game fun, they're gonna play it. Marathon, an extraction shooter adaptation of the 1990s FPS of the same name, has incredible yet precariously balanced potential. The world of Marathon is a mind-bending one, with story at its center. Escape from Tarkov proves that this can be very effectively translated even within the PvPvE extraction shooter environment. The better that Marathon leans into its story-driven roots in a subtle, dynamic, and new way, the better. The game already appears to have an extremely strong visual language and personal tastes here. It has the coolest art style that I've ever seen. The gameplay will have to stand on its own, and Bungie has never designed poor shooting controls on PC or console. That's important too. This game is being built from the ground up for consoles, something that no other game in the subgenre can say. Marathon's success is gonna ride on how well it breaks into the extraction shooter genre uniquely. It needs to do something that no other game has done yet, in a way which evolves the mode while retaining highly replayable and consistently satisfying and engaging core gameplay. If it works well, it'll be a hit for mainstream audiences, and even if it doesn't, we're gonna get a killer art book out of it. These next few years are going to make or break this genre. It's still not clear if it will ever become mainstream, but the specific design decisions brought forward by games in the genre have already become so. The absurd level of EFT's weapon customization and realistic animation design instantly set a new standard for shooters, and while no one's made a PvP game with audio design as good as Crytek's, they should. Innovation is actually key to this whole conversation. A good extraction shooter, similarly to a good game in any subgenre, needs to be an entertaining, engaging, and unique piece of interactive media first, and an extraction shooter second. Maybe it'll take a while. Counter-Strike didn't see a successful evolution of its core idea until almost 20 years after its initial release. If anything, the genre has a bright future outside the PvP space, and personally, I think that single-player or co-op experiences are a severely untapped market right now. The possibilities within the relatively freeform lines of the genre could create some real gems if developers are willing to step outside the boundaries, get a little daring, and make something fresh. From a selfish perspective, I love the raw intensity of the game mode, and I'm really excited to keep playing it in different worlds, as different characters, hunting for different goodies. But even if the original extraction shooters are never topped, I think it's undeniable the effect that they've had on the industry that inspired them. I'm Rilo. I talk about things that I think are cool. Subscribe for more like this, and thanks for watching.